MeshKit provides some really cool editor tools that make it easy to edit common everyday issues with 3D meshes. You'll find a list of powerful 3D tools in the MeshKit window. We'll start with the Invert Tool. The Invert Tool allows us to invert the normals of a 3D mesh. This essentially turns it inside out. You can see that if we zoom into this house, we'll be able to look right through it. This is because the mesh normals are facing outwards instead of inwards. Let's click the Invert Tool now, and also let's allow MeshKit to back up our scene. It looks like this model is using submeshes. This isn't an issue for MeshKit, we'll simply need to separate these meshes first. So let's switch to the Separate tool and click the parent object of this house. This will allow us to separate all of the houses in the scene. If we open one of the houses in the hierarchy, we can see the newly created submeshes as their own separated objects. At this point, it's also worth mentioning how MeshKit automatically organizes your assets during these operations. MeshKit uses the same folder that Unity uses to store data such as lighting and skyboxes. In this folder, you'll have access to the backup scene that MeshKit created for you, as well as a series of meshes that were created during each of the operations. You don't need to worry about this folder as MeshKit automatically handles these assets for you. But remember that if you need to revert to an older version of your scene, that's where you can find your backup. Now that we understand how local mesh assets are organized, and the meshes have been separated, let's get back to inverting this house. Clicking the Invert button will also invert all child objects by default. We'll now see that the meshes are facing inwards instead of outwards. This is useful if we were trying to build an interior scene using models that were not originally designed for that purpose. In this specific case, we could easily create a new floor by creating some quads. But we'll undo this operation and test out the TwoSided tool instead. The TwoSided tool is similar to the Invert tool, but will actually create a new version of the mesh that faces both directions. You will want to do this if you want to have the house face inwards and outwards at the same time. Bear in mind this requires more resources than simply inverting it. In most cases, this isn't an issue. Another cool feature of MeshKit is the Rebuild tool. The Rebuild tool allows you to create new versions of your mesh with or without normals and tangents. This is a great way to reduce the amount of memory your meshes are using without affecting the originals. To demonstrate this, I will remove both the tangents and normals from the house in the middle. You can see that the other houses are unaffected by this change, and now the house in the middle is using far less memory. MeshKit also allows you to do the opposite. If you have meshes that do not have normals or tangents, you can have MeshKit dynamically create them on the fly while leaving the originals unaffected. It's worth noting that you can use the MeshKit API to utilize these tools to dynamically create mesh complexity during loading screens or other situations. For example, you could strip normals, tangents, or both on mobile builds and dynamically create them on the desktop or console. MeshKit offers a super easy way to clean up all of the old meshes you have been building in the scene using the Clean Scene tool. This tool scans your scene and checks to see if any of the meshes are not being used anymore. It then allows you to delete them, which keeps your project streamlined and clutter-free. So to recap, we've used MeshKit to perform a variety of operations such as inverting, creating double-sided meshes, as well as stripping and rebuilding normals and tangents. We also checked out the basics of MeshKit's automatic asset management and scene cleaning functionality. Thanks for taking the time to check out MeshKit.